Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hi, and welcome to the ISO Show. Well, thank you for joining us today. This is obviously on camera as well, so that's a first for us at the ISO Show. We're going to be doing the podcast in relation to sustainability on camera, which I'm really excited about. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Charlie Martin, who is the founder and CEO of the Anti-Greenwash Charter. Welcome, Charlie.
Mel, thank you so much. That was a perfect intro. I know you and I are both equally as nervous about the prospect of doing this show. So, really excited to ease the nerves and to get into the conversation.
Yes, normally when it's on audio, it's really straightforward. I can just rock. I could actually turn up in my pajamas if I wanted to, but I felt that I needed to put on a lipstick on this occasion. So yes, yeah. No, but very warm welcome. Obviously, I've known you for some time now, and I've heard about the amazing work that the Anti-Greenwash Charter has been involved with, and the movement that it's creating as well to combat greenwashing. Really excited to hear more about the Charter and your role as well. So, if you don't mind, could we just go back to basics? And if you could just share with me, what inspired you to create the Anti-Greenwash Charter?
Sure, Mel. Sure. We're going to go trip down memory lane here. This will be interesting and exciting for me. So I'm a kind of a marketing and comms guy by trade. I used to run an agency called Gusto. It was an agency predominantly based here in the UK and predominantly working on sustainability communications for organisations in the built environment and construction sectors. So a very typical brief for us running that agency was that an organisation would come to us with their sustainability strategy, and they would say, guys, we want to work out how to share this both impactfully, but obviously responsibly as well, in order to sort of further our sustainability credentials and the impact that it has on the way that people view our brand and our business. So everything kind of shifted for us, and the sort of the origins of the Anti-Greenwash Charter came back in 2021. And I can't remember the exact month or date, but it was early 2021 when the Competition and Markets Authority here in the UK published their Green Claims Code. And alongside their Green Claims Code, they published a piece of research which suggested, I think the headline was 40% of all sustainability related messaging online was found to be misleading in one way or another. And we had two very proactive clients at the time for our agency at Gusto who came to us and knocked on our doors and basically said, guys, we've got a new brief for you. And I should say one of those organizations was going through B Corp certification at the time. So I think for them, it was even more of a sort of an opportunity really to think about how they were communicating their sustainability credentials. So they came to us and they said, look, we know that the CMA has not identified the built environment as one of its go-to sectors. I think initially they were talking about fashion, beauty, perhaps retail as well as their sort of sectors that they were going to focus their attention on. But the two clients we were working with said, look, guys, the built environment, 40% of all emissions come from the built environment sector. We know that we're going to be next, basically. So the brief to you as an agency is, can you come up with some sort of campaign that we can run that can essentially increase confidence both internally within our organizations and obviously externally in our sustainability messaging? So we sat down with the Green Claims Code and we thought in our team, we were like, what could we do? What is the antidote to these concerns around the claims and the messaging of these two particular clients? And what we didn't really realize at the time, because we weren't forward thinking enough to have had this in mind, is that we came up with this idea that people refer to as proactive disclosure. So we thought, wouldn't it be incredibly liberating for these two clients to put together what we termed at the time a green claims policy? So we thought, wouldn't it be fantastic to have a document that was publicly available that essentially detailed exactly what these organizations did in order to ensure that the marketing and communications that they produced were delivered as responsibly as possible. And that was the concept that we came up with, to proactively disclose the way that this sort of part of the business operated. So within that, we came up with ideas of, wouldn't it be great to include, details around your editorial process? So who checks what before it's actually published? Is there a sustainability team, a legal team, a marketing team that all kind of input into looking at a piece of content before it's published? What's their approach to internal training of staff? How do they go about making sure that, all their team members are greenwash aware and implement anti-greenwashing best practice? I could go on, but there's many other sections, if you like, and sections within a green claims policy. So to answer your question directly, this was the beginning of the Anti-Greenwash Charter. This was the origins, the notion of a green claims policy. And obviously we've gone on since to build a much more robust and thorough accreditation, signatory onboarding process and license period work that we do as well. But that was the origin.
Right. Thank you for explaining the story behind that, and the compelling reasons for bridging that gap ultimately. And I'll be interested in delving into some of those areas in a bit more detail shortly. But let's just go back to basics in terms of greenwashing, because it's the term is thrown around such a lot. For those of our listeners that have heard of it being mentioned a lot of the time, it'd be really good to get your angle on, how do you define greenwashing, and what are some of the most common insidious forms that you've observed, particularly in relation to carbon claims?
Very good question, Mel. And I think, as with any of this stuff, the devil's in the detail when it comes to obviously making sure that organizations do communicate appropriately, and obviously defining particular terms is absolutely crucial to getting that right. So essentially greenwashing, there are different definitions out there, but at the very core and the heart of it, greenwashing is about overstating or misleading stakeholders relating to the environmental credentials of an organization, a service, or a product. That is essentially what we use as our determination of what greenwashing is. So it's overstating one's green credentials, essentially.
And the next podcast that we'll be doing is actually on the new Green Claims Directive, which, interested to speak to you about that in more detail. But you mentioned about, obviously being very clear and transparent, and ultimately that is what I understand the Anti-Greenwash Charter to be all about, to be able to promote transparency and accountability. What are the key principles of the Charter, and how do you ensure that organisations can adhere to it if they become a signatory?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Mel. And actually, one thing that I didn't address when you were asking before in the question about greenwashing was, what are the different types of greenwashing? And I think that's actually a really important question that sort of lends itself to the standards of the Charter as well. So I think really greenwashing can be kind of boiled down, if you like, into two categories: the things that you say and the things that you don't say. So the omissions relating to your position. So it's one thing whereby you might make a claim about, the environmental credentials of a particular part of your business. But if you're making that claim within the broader context of numerous other areas of your operation being incredibly poor when it comes to your environmental credentials, then that could be seen as greenwashing. That is not that your particular claim in of itself is misleading, but the context in which you're making the claim makes it a misleading claim. So that's, I think, a really crucial part of understanding the sort of, the more direct form of greenwashing and the more indirect form of greenwashing. To come back to your question about the standards, so our standards are very much aligned with the Green Claims Code. Our whole charter was inspired by, as I say, the Green Claims Code. So we look at four kind of key standards and principles. So it's accountability, it's honesty, it's fairness, and transparency. And those are the four key fundamentals, if you like, that we ask all of the organizations that we work with to uphold in terms of their marketing communications. I could go into the detail of them, but what I would say is that anyone that's interested in understanding how those principles play out, feel free to head to the antigreenwashcharter.com and you can find out more.
Brilliant. I mean, if we could just pick on one of those examples and expand on that, I think that would be really helpful, Charlie. And how do you ensure that signatories do actually adhere to that particular example?
Yeah, Mel, it's a really good question. I think transparency is probably, let's take transparency. I mean, it is the most sort of, I think transparency is in many ways is like the most fundamental standard or principle with which organizations that we work with are choosing to adopt. And transparency in its very nature is about not just sharing all the best news relating to your organization and all the best claims, but ultimately being prepared to share the areas where you as an organization are not as strong, and to be upfront and to be held to a high standard of transparency by sharing that. So I think one of the major things that we did with our green claims policy template, and a requirement for all green claims policies that our signatories publish, is that the first section, the very first section of every policy, is titled "Where we could improve." And this was intentional, because what we wanted to do was to say, look, there's no organization out there that is environmentally sustainable. We are all, to a greater or lesser extent, unsustainable in terms of the nature of the businesses that are at play in the world right now. And so with that, we need you as a signatory, or the way that we hold our signatories to account is they have to acknowledge those areas where they aren't sustainable. And they need to identify how they're going about trying to improve in those areas. So I think to address that question directly, that's, I think, a key part, is to, if you're going to implement proactive disclosure around these things, you need to be upfront about the areas that your business can improve. And that's something that's a requirement for all of our signatories.
Okay, great. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of organisations doing is making net zero pledges, which is great. It could be, science-based targets, and so again, that's another pledge. And organisations have got a period of time in order to be able to make that pledge if they're doing it through SBTIs. But what are your thoughts on the current state of net zero claims? Because obviously, there's a difference between making a pledge and then actually being able to show progress on delivering on it. I mean, what would you say is the essential criteria for a credible net zero pledge or strategy?
Mel, that's such a good question. And obviously, we're going to come on to talk about the EU's Green Claims Directive. And I think what's really interesting about the directive is that it specifically highlighted kind of future claims, if you like, and has specifically noted some requirements that it has in terms of how we go about making sure that there are credible, you use the term credible, and I think that's spot on, credible plans to realize these objectives, these net zero objectives, if you like. I think this is really challenging. I really do, I think a lot of this stuff, and I know this is a sort of an uncomfortable thing for people to get their heads around, but I think someone that I spoke to previously said a lot of this stuff, we've got to acknowledge that we're clumsy, that we're in a stage and an age when it comes to sustainability broadly, where a lot of us are just trying to do the very best we can with the information that we have available to us right now. And we are going to get things wrong, and we are going to overstate, and we are going to possibly find ourselves setting objectives that we aren't able to realize. I think there's a danger potentially if we're not ambitious in terms of the way that we go about setting these objectives and setting these potential, net zero claims, if you like, that in some way sort of stops us from trying to reach for, the very, very best outcomes that we can achieve. So I think you're right. We need to have credible, substantiated plans and transition plans for organizations to adopt. And there are clear criteria on making sure that they are fully substantiated, that you're using, real data, you're using historical data to inform, your projections, etc. So I think there are key best practices, but I think we need to be really careful not to go too far the other way and essentially, stop organizations and individuals from setting ambitious targets, which I think we need in order to stimulate the kind of innovation that we clearly need in order to realize some of these collective goals.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, we need to be ambitious, because obviously we've got a huge challenge ahead of us, haven't we, in terms of achieving net zero. But I think one of the The ways to achieving that is just to break it down, from the longer term goals, to the medium short term goals, and start taking action. I know that obviously we've had experience with standards and organisations adopting ISO 14064 as that framework to be able to have a standard to be able to measure their carbon footprint against and then get it independently verified. So we've actually got an independent third party that's saying, yes, your carbon emissions are X and you have reduced your carbon emissions by X, or you may not have actually. What's your view on the role of standards in combating greenwashing?
Oh, well, I think, Mel, the way that you've portrayed things there, and actually, again, I know we're talking about the Charter here, but in this section, but again, coming back to the EU's Green Claims Directive, again, this was something that was clearly identified as a mandatory requirement moving forward. Is going to be the independent verification of claims before they're made in the public domain. And so, yes, these standards, these third parties that can be leveraged and utilised in order to independently verify that the claims that you're making are fully substantiated, it is going to become a requirement moving forward sooner rather than later. So I think, again, one of the things that we're doing with the Charter, and actually a few of our signatories have already highlighted this, is that they're preparing for something similar as the EU's Green Claims Directive coming into force in the UK by adopting our methodology and our framework, which very much requires our signatories to seek independent verification of the claims that they're making. So I think you're spot on. This is a necessary thing for organisations to start really focusing on now, is what's going to be their process for independent verification of the claims they want to make.
Yeah, and because data and measurement is absolutely crucial for accurate carbon accounting. What do you find are the biggest challenges that companies are facing in accurately measuring their carbon footprint, and how does the Charter help to address these challenges?
That's a really good question. So the first thing I would say is that we are in no way at the Charter sort of experts in carbon accounting, and we have partners that we refer. And I know you and I are having conversations, or hopefully having conversations, about possible alignment with the work that you guys do, and possibly how we might be able to be supported by you. But I think the main thing that we're there to do is to signpost. So we know that when organisations come and work with us, they want to understand, what do we do in order to make sure that our claims are fully substantiated, and who do we work with, and what methodologies and what tools and technologies are available in order for us to ensure that we have the right data and that we are carbon accounting in a correct and foolproof and robust manner. And that's where obviously our partners come into play. So yes, it's something that we know is really, really important, but our sort of bit of the game, if you like, is then taking what is substantiated as a claim that can be made about the carbon credentials of a company, and then how do you go about communicating that most appropriately? And that's the crucial bit of work that we do.
Okay, great. And if an organisation would like to sign up to the Anti-Greenwash Charter or adopt it, could you just walk us through how one would go about doing that?
Of course, Mel, of course. Well, I think the first thing to say, we've spoken a lot during this conversation, which I've appreciated, about the role of a green claims policy. So what I would say is we think that a green claims policy is something that, regardless of whether or not an organisation is working with the Anti-Greenwash Charter, we obviously hope that you would choose to join and to sign up with us. But even those that don't, we think a green claims policy is a liberating and actually, I would say in many ways it's a what's the word? I've forgotten the word. It's a word that I use in all of my calls, and now that I've been put on the spot in a podcast, I've totally forgotten it. But
that's always the way, isn't it?
It's always the way. It's always. I'll remember it immediately. But by developing and publishing your own, if you are an organisation that makes green claims, you make claims about the environmental credentials of your organisation, I would strongly advise you to consider creating a green claims policy and publishing it. on our website, you can go and you can actually download our green claims policy template. We give it away completely for free. You can go through it and it essentially walks you through the step-by-step process of producing your own. I would say to any organization listening into this, go and hopefully we can link to this, Mel, perhaps in the materials.
Yeah, I was just thinking that actually, Charlie. I think it'd be, yeah, if we could include the links to that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is the starting point for any organization. Now, in terms of working with us, and the reason why organizations kind of choose to work with us is that they're obviously publishing a green claims policy is fantastic, a brilliant first step, but obviously being held to account for what's in that policy is the role that we can then play. So the first step in the process is to complete an application to join the charter. Obviously, we have this in place to just make sure that we weed out any bad actors that are essentially choosing to try and sign the Anti-Greenwash Charter to act as a form of greenwashing in of itself. So that's the first step. There's an application form on our website, and anybody out there that's interested, we look forward to receiving your application.
Right, yeah, we'll include links to that in the show notes, definitely. So beyond greenwashing, what are the broader benefits for companies that adopt a transparent and credible green claim? Let's say they've adopted that policy and they are being transparent. What would you say the broader benefits to those organisations?
So Mel, I love it. Your questions are absolutely fantastic, can I just say? And I love how you didn't have to share them with me before, but they're very well positioned. I literally had a call with one of our signatories yesterday, actually, and I was asking them exactly those questions. I said, you've been a signatory for a couple of years now. What has been the impact? And it was fascinating because they were able to give very specific examples of tender frameworks whereby their status as a signatory of the Anti-Greenwash Charter was picked up and has essentially scored as a value against their tender submissions. So we're getting direct feedback now that it's been picked up in those kind of tender framework scenarios, which is obviously fantastic for us to hear that it's a point of difference, if you like, on those scoring frameworks. I think the main other thing that we spoke about was just the confidence that being a signatory of the Anti-Greenwash Charter and all that it entails gives not only the external stakeholders of the organisation, but I think probably even more crucially the internal teams that we work with. So part of our signatory development process now is that we work to deliver training, greenwash awareness training for teams of the organisations that we work with. And what that gives them is these sort of fundamental tools and techniques, if you like, that they can utilise in order to ensure that they check everything properly before it's published. And that, I think, is crucial. And I think that's particularly crucial because of the rise, especially currently, I think, in the kind of geopolitical atmosphere, if you like, that we're all operating in, is this notion of green hushing. Which again, if I just have a moment to define, Mel, is essentially the sort of the counterweight to greenwashing. So green hushing is the fear of greenwashing leading to organizations choosing not to share anything about their environmental credentials and not to publish content around it. And the big problem with this is that, coming back to the point that you made earlier, Mel, that if we're going to collectively address some of these problems, we're going to need to learn from each other. We're going to need to be inspired by the things that our competitors are doing or our suppliers are doing. And that's why we need organizations to be confident about sharing their environmental initiatives and performances.
I agree. I think there's so much that we can learn from each other. We are moving at such a pace, towards net zero. And yeah, I think, from, technology to different techniques, methodologies, and the outcome of that. I think I think, when we see that other organizations are being successful in their achievements, it gives us hope, doesn't it? So I completely agree with you. I think green hushing is a cowardly way, really. Yeah, I think just kind of hiding behind some of those great initiatives and progress towards sustainability, I think it should be commended and celebrated, not hidden away.
And Mel, I completely agree, but I also think that it's understand. I mean, we live in a world now where it's understandable. If you're an organization, you're thinking, right, we're going to create a load of campaigns here that are going to try and position our business in a particular way. We have got a major threat, that if we don't have things absolutely 100% robust in the way that we're positioning this, that if a notion of greenwashing, if a claim of greenwashing comes our way, then the reputational damage that can do is so significant that I understand why marketing directors and comms directors are sitting there going, let's just not touch it. Let's not even put ourselves in that position. It's understandable. But that's why, again, I think that we need frameworks and processes, which hopefully is something that we're looking to try and do, to build that confidence in organizations to say, no, we know we've been through best practice, we know we've shown due diligence, we know we're going to make mistakes, but we know we're going to make mistakes within this framework and within this commitment that we've made. And I think that's the crucial value, if you like, that we're looking to deliver.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side, if organisations do this the right way, there is a significant competitive advantage for them. And can you think of any examples where, any of the signatories that have signed up for the Anti-Greenwash Charter have leveraged it for their competitive advantage, but also to be able to communicate the long-term, sustainability strategy and their achievements?
Absolutely. I mean, Mel, absolutely. I would say that we've had sort of anecdotal feedback from all of our signatories to suggest that in one way or another, being a signatory of the Charter and being able to present themselves as such has had an advantage, whether or not that be internally, as I alluded to, or externally. But I think, coming back to my point before, I think the thing that we're really excited about, because it is, I guess, when people think about the value of doing these things, the financial return is key and paramount, is that feedback that we're getting about these tender frameworks and the fact that it's been picked up on and seen as an additional point of difference, an additional point of best practice to have been through the Anti-Greenwash Charters process and be recognised as a certified signatory. So that's what we're really excited about in terms of the impact of the work that we're doing.
Great. Now, I know that we're going to be talking about the Green Claims Directive in the next podcast. I'm fortunate enough to be able to get you not just once, but twice onto the podcast. I thought to make the most of that time with you. But obviously the regulatory landscape is evolving at such a pace, specifically around obviously the Green Claims Directive and carbon claims as well. I mean, what role do you see that our government has here in the UK and potentially further afield overseas, and also regulatory bodies in playing? What role do you see them having in terms of combating greenwashing, and are there any policy changes that you would like to see?
Mel, that's a great question as well. You're very good. You're a very good host, I should say. Just slightly segueing out. You know exactly how to answer that question.
Coming from another podcast host, actually.
Well, I'm picking up. I'm learning a lot. This is great. I'm going to take some of this forward. It's such a good question. I'm going to start. It's nuanced though, because you talked about some fairly different jurisdictions. I think and we're going to talk about the EU Green Claims Directive. I think the EU's Green Claims Directive is absolutely best in class. If you look at what not only it's requiring organizations to do, but you actually look at some of the threats, or not threats, sorry, that's the wrong terminology. I don't want to use that term, but the consequences that are being detailed if you get this stuff wrong. I think it is best in class. It is leading, and there's not really. I mean, you asked about additionals. There's always going to be opportunities to improve it and make it better, but it's really strong in terms of the foundations of what it's asking organizations to do. If we then take the UK though, and we look at the Green Claims Code, and we look at the role of the CMA, it's weaker. It is weaker. It's that both in terms of the CMA's role that it's played over the course of the last couple of years. There have been, very public examples of where the CMA has not, been strong enough in terms of its dealing with certain organisations. And I'm reminded of the Boohoo, ASDA, and one other instance from last year where, essentially with the prospect of 10% of global revenue fines being at play potentially, this is what the CMA sort of directed and suggest could happen. It was watered down through negotiation to a voluntary agreement of a change of practice. amongst those organizations. And I just read that and I thought, this is so concerning that we've gone from 10% of global revenue fines potentially to a completely watered down kind of voluntary negotiation on change of behavior. And I just thought, anyone that's looking at that in the UK is thinking, we don't really need to play this game the way that the CMA is setting it out. So, I won't go on to talk about the US and the green files and some of the other areas around the world, the Australians, the ACCS, and etc. But in terms of the UK, I think we've got work to do to align ourselves with Europe.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it's interesting you mentioned about the 10%, and I can't remember if I've mentioned to you before, but most of our listeners probably won't be aware of this. But I'm doing a master's by research, and it's specifically in relation to greenhouse gas emissions and verification and the role that it plays. What are the drivers? What are the impacts of it in terms of our journey towards net zero? And more recently, I've been researching the sustainable finance aspect. And there are a number of papers now that are demonstrating from research and linking with the CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, S&P 500, and the FTSE as well, that basically there's compelling evidence that says that a company value increases by an average 10% if their carbon claims are actually independently verified. It's interesting how you'd be going from a 10% deficit to potentially, by getting it wrong, to actually focusing on this as a serious subject and looking at third-party assurance and then increasing the value of an organisation by 10%. But that's the 20% there, isn't it? It's quite significant.
And Mel, I think you've nailed that. I think, we've very much titillated this second podcast, that anyone that's listening into this one needs to definitely listen into the next one if you're compelled to do so. But it's interesting because, you're so right. The carrot and the stick relating to independent verification is just getting so strong. So I really do agree with you that it is the opportunity right now for, if we're talking about UK based businesses who perhaps operate in Europe, it's coming quickly. But if you're UK focused, this is an opportunity to get ahead and realize that competitive advantage quickly. So, if there is a call to arms, it is seriously consider the independent verification of your claims, because at some point the stick is coming, but right now the carrot is there.
So talking about getting ahead, and in terms of looking ahead for the Anti-Greenwash Charter, what are your future aspirations for the Charter, and what are your hopes for the future of being able to make credible climate action changes and claims?
Well, Mel, that's again brilliant question, and I appreciate I waffle on, so I'll try and keep this concise. This one, I think one of the major things we have recently just had our first signatory, imminently be sort of promoted, but our first signatory in the US. We have another new signatory in Australia as well. So what's really exciting is that we are generally, beginning to look at a multinational initiative and framework here. The ambition for this is as broad and as big as it gets. We, as I mentioned earlier, with the green claims policy, we want to see any organisation that is making claims about its environmental credentials be, whether or not it's required by legislation or encouraged by our movement, to produce and publish a green claims policy. We think it's absolutely essential to essentially drive trust and confidence in the claims that organizations are making, which is a fundamental part of us being able to address some of the climate and environmental issues at play. We need to all be confident in what we're actually reading and engaging with in order to allow us to make decisions quickly and to make informed decisions without, the sort of the suspicious eye, if you like, wasting time. So that's, I think, at the core and the fundamental of what we're trying to do. And one of the ways that we have decided to evolve our organization in order to facilitate that is that we have recently made the decision to incorporate the Anti-Greenwash Charter as a not-for-profit company. And this was core and fundamental to some soul searching, I suppose, amongst our team to say, look, why are we doing this? What are the goals and intentions here? And the goals and intentions are for us to make this a worldwide initiative and something that's adopted, because we think it could have a massive impact. And one of the things that we wanted to remove, if you like, from any question marks over our authenticity and credibility in doing this was that profit extraction question. So that's some news for your listeners, is that we're fully committed to realizing this outcome for impact and impact alone.
Well, that's really inspiring, Charlie. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, and I think that's a nice end, I think, to the podcast, and talking about the future aspirations and where the Anti-Greenwash Charter is heading, and the fact that it's going global is just testament to the wonderful work that you're doing there. So thank you very much for joining me today, Charlie. Really enjoyed our chat, and I learned so much as well during the process, which I'm sure our iSocial listeners have done as well, and will appreciate that time. So we'll include the links for the website onto the show notes, and so any listeners that would like to go there, you'll be able to get access to the charter and to be able to contact Charlie. I'm sure if you've got any questions, or if you're interested in finding out more about the Anti-Greenwash Charter and potentially attending those training courses that Charlie mentioned earlier as well. So thanks very much, Charlie.
Absolutely delighted, Mel. It was brilliant. Thank you for having me.
Cheers. Thank you. I look forward to catching up with our listeners on the next episode of the ISO Show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.